which is why I have come more so in high school, let's say, than college.
All right, well, I guess we'll get started. Welcome, everybody, to our training today. We are very excited to have Dr. Dennis from UCO. He actually is the Executive Director of the Center for Excellence in Transformative Teaching and Learning. So that is a very long name.
Small font, all my business.
Yeah, sure. His research and application interests have long focused on what college faculty can do to help their students learn, to be motivated toward deep learning strategies, and to persist in their education. He was also the director of Texas Christian University's Kohler Center for Teaching Effectiveness. And before that, he worked in higher education and faculty development since 1994 and as a faculty member since 1990. His EDB in higher education, he has an EDB in higher education with a cognate in adult and continuing education from the University of North Texas. So needless to say, we are very excited to have him today. So just make sure that you've signed in so you can get credit for this session. And please raise your hand if you need a handout. Did everybody get one? Okay, good. All right, well, without further ado, here is Dr. Kim.
Thanks, Misty. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. What a wonderful resource and room and everything. I mean, and you fed me well. This is very cool. So I'm just absolutely delighted to be here. I know Dr. Dennis Williams from working with him on the Da Vinci Institute board, and I know his office is just around the corner. So even though this is my first trip to the campus, I kind of feel like I'm home, just because I know some people here. Anyway, and on that note, it would help me just to know who you guys are. I've already met Kirk in business. So if you would just let me know who you are and which department, and obviously I always pick the person who's still chewing.
My name is Carrie Bentley, and I'm the chair of the biology department.
Great.
I'm Amy Walmer, and I'm a student. I major science education.
Super. Good.
I'm Mandy Will. I'm also a student and I'm in science ed.
Thanks. Great. Glad you're here.
I'm Jason Coles. I'm in the Department of Kinesiology.
Ah, great.
I'm Jamie Newland, and I'm in the online learning center.
Yep, absolutely. And Misty, I know, will remind me
That's
official
okay.
time.
No, that's fine. I'm the instructional designer here at the Online Resource Center.
And I'm Laura Cook, and I'm the activity coordinator for the online resource.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony Rodin, political science.
Heather Clemmer, department chair of history, politics, and geography, and general education director.
Okay.
She
Congratulations.
wears that outfit all the time. This is business attire.
My name's Mike Parker. I'm an adjunct professor in humanities and culture and communication.
Super.
Wherever they say do this. Okay.
And he does it well.
Great.
He does. Melissa Lewis, chair for the School of Music.
Oh, super. I was actually a music major for both my bachelor and my master's degree. Yeah, so I spent many years in the marching band and many years in the orchestra and all of those kind of things. Well, thank you very much for introducing yourselves. I want to be as informal and comfortable as possible, so we'll have a good time and learn some interesting things, I think, that you may be able to use very quickly in your classrooms. And some of the things that we'll talk about will be based on some information about how the human brain inside your students' heads work, you hope, most of the time. So
Go ahead and share that with the.
oh, okay, that's right. It was the green one, right?
Yeah.
Is that okay? And that should you can give me a hand.
Sometimes it's funny.
Oh, and welcome to anyone who may be attending virtually. I just yesterday did a virtual webinar for the EDUCAUSE conference, so
Awesome.
yeah, I And I'm in my virtual mode. Today.
Yay.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. The title of this is, should I go ahead and launch the slideshow here? Okay, perfect. When I launch the slideshow, you'll see why I ask to do it. And there we go. Okay, I know that sometimes you feel like this when you're having to create tests, but I chose this title, How to Drop Tests from Your 4-Word or your 4-letter word vocabulary, because there are some ways to get feedback about what students are doing that is not how students interpret what testing is, and can also be done as a manner to help students learn. I know you're saying, yeah, but shouldn't all tests be tests to help them learn? And they should be, but there are some characteristics and attributes and manners in which students work that sometimes mitigate against the learning opportunities that may be there otherwise with tests. And we'll talk about a few of them in a minute. So a test is for many students a 4-letter word, but arose by any other name. There are some other names for tests. You know, you can call them quizzes, you can call them some different things, and I would definitely recommend that, especially when we get to the 3 different ways of testing, or different ways to conceptualize testing that we'll talk about today. And this is hands-on, so you guys will get to do a little be a learner and do some retrieval practice and some other things. So we'll have fun doing it. But this is what comes to mind immediately a lot of times when students think about testing, right? Many times if a student is in a big lecture class, let's say, they may get 3 tests across the entire length of a 16-week semester. A midterm, a final, another test thrown in somewhere, and maybe a project. And some students are fine with that. A lot of students think, oh, this is great, not many tests. Not understanding, oh my goodness, the tests are the things that actually help me learn. And so this is what's inside many students' minds when they think about testing. But at the end of our time today, maybe you'll understand how to make that a difference. So what I've got here is some sheets that I'd like for you guys to be learners with for about 1 minute. And take a look at, and for those of you who might be online, it's what's shown on your screen right now. It's maybe new information for you. I hope so. That's what will let you have the opportunity to drink in a little information that you haven't seen before. So just take a look at this for about a minute. Okay, now those of you who have a paper, turn it over so you can't see it anymore and just put it to the side. Incidentally, as I watched some of you reading and eating at the same time, I'll bet nobody here has ever taken the Personal Environment Preference Survey, PEPS, and it was developed to try and help people figure out what's my most successful learning environment in terms of temperature. Is there music that's supposed to be playing or not playing? How loud, how soft? Am I taking food in? Do I not want to take food in? And it goes through about 25 different things. And so I did this thing back in the mid-90s or whatever, And I found out that, yes, I'm very definitely an intake person. That's what they refer to as, I like to eat something when I'm reading, or, snack on something, or a mug of tea, something like that. So as I was watching, I mean, we're in an artificial environment. You're eating because it's lunchtime, and, you may not have barbecue next to you when you're studying, but it was an interesting little study to take, and they had benchmarks and norms and everything else. So if you're like me, you're an intake person when you like to study. Okay, first of the three that I want to talk about and share a little about, and as I said, I want to be as informal as possible, so just shout out questions anytime. We're a small group here. We can hear. You're very polite people. Nothing's going to get out of hand, so, just ask questions as we go along. Spaced repetition is exactly what you might guess it is. But there are some things that you may not know about it. And this is an admittedly very rough, hand-drawn picture of what many people have come to call the forgetting curve. Ebbinghaus, way back at the turn of the last century, was the guy who declared to the world, "I have discovered how to count learning." And that was a big, big deal because historically, Richard Fisher was kicking around and starting to develop this discipline of statistics, and you can't run stats on something you can't count. And so it was very important in education and psychology for learning to be countable. And so Ebbinghaus was the guy who figured out, or at least he proclaimed, that he could count learning. And basically it was because he used himself as the subject, so right off the bat we've got an N of 1. But he used himself as a subject to memorize nonsense syllables. Syllables that you can say out loud that aren't difficult for the language, but they don't mean anything. And then he tested, how long does it take me to forget them? And what do I have to do to try and remember them? And so he developed a curve, and what he discovered was, if you look at this graphic, in the absence of anything else happening, if a student is exposed to information and doesn't do anything else, 24 hours later, the best a student's going to remember is 20% of that. If it's 48 hours later, it drops down to 10%. And I don't know if the line ever gets asymptotic, but it continues to go down. The bad news about this is, if you think about how students study many times, they don't look at the information again within 24 hours, within 48 hours. Sometimes it's 3 weeks later, and the only reason then is because there's the test the next day, right? And then it's an all-night cram session, and that is not a review because they've forgotten so much by that point. It's down to 1%, 2%. It's a reteaching session. And so there's no time to review. It's got to be a reteach from the beginning. But the reason that this is so interesting is because students can do one very, very simple thing that will pop them from 20% up to 50% if they do it within 24 hours, and the 50% line pretty much sticks, so it doesn't keep going down. And this thing they have to do only takes a few minutes. But most students don't know to do this. I didn't know to do it when I was in college. Wish I had. And that one simple thing is, within 24 hours, review the information. Even if it's just 2, 3, 5-minute review. And that can be from your notes, it can be from handouts, it can be from, these days even video clips that you can fast forward through, the PowerPoint that the instructor provided. Just a 3 to 5 minute review within 24 hours. The within 24 hours is really, really important because of our ultradian rhythms in our body. Ultradian rhythm is any rhythm that's less than 24 hours in its cycle. So I want you guys that are here in the room with me to play along and do something very weird. This is being captured, right? Is this going to be video captured too?
Well, right now, just your screen.
Just the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, those of you watching, and just imagine what this looks like. So what I want you guys that are here with me to do is to make your hands like this so that your index fingers, you got a knuckle. Now we're going to find out right now at this instant whether you're right nostril dominant or left nostril dominant, okay? The way you do it is block your right nostril, take a breath in, block your left nostril, take a breath in. Keep doing that until you figure out which nostril's getting more air at this point. So you might need to do a few repetitions. I should get this on right. How many of you are right nostril dominant to your best thinking right now? Okay, how many left nostril dominant? And are any of you about equal? Anybody show up? This is a perfect example of an ultradian rhythm. If you didn't know it, your nostril dominance switches back and forth for most humans in a cycle every 30 to 90 minutes. And this is one of the reasons why you feel so lousy when you have a cold. You might think, well, I'm stopped up. That's what's making me feel lousy. Yeah, but it's also messing with your ultradian nostril dominance rhythm because you can't go back and forth on your normal 32-minute or 47-minute cycle, whatever it was. And this is important. Now you're thinking, why would anybody even want to research nostril dominance? And yes, there are researchers who have looked into nostril dominance. Because remember your biology, left or right hemisphere controls which side of the body? Left. And vice versa. So we're contralateral. What happens is, if I'm taking more air in on my left nostril, I've got literally a little bit more electrical activity running across the surface of my right hemisphere on my brain, and vice versa. So researchers have found out that students taking math tests, if they are, now guess, which nostril dominant would you suspect they should try to be when they're taking a math test?
Right.
Right, because the left hemisphere would be the one most activated, and supposedly, even though everybody gets it that hemispheres aren't all one thing or the other, but there's a statistically significant correlation that if you happen to be right nostril dominant when you're taking a math test, you're going to do better. Now, that sounds wonderful, but what if I'm a student and my natural ultradian rhythm has me being left nostril dominant when I go in to take the test? These researchers found out that you can force your nostril dominance. So, if you're going in to take the test and you happen to be left nostril dominant, you can just block that left nostril for about a minute and it'll force you to switch over to the other one. And then you're ready to take that math test. Yeah, there are people that research this, if you can believe it. One of the main guys researching, his last name is Shanahoff Kosla, and as you can imagine, he is an international faculty member, but he comes from a Taoist tradition in India, and there's a saying in the Taoist tradition which goes, breath is the horse and mind is the rider. And there's also a tradition that there's a sun breath when you breathe in with one nostril, a moon breath when you breathe in with another, and coming from that tradition, he said, I'm curious, does this have any kind of impact? So he found math statistically significant performance, and he also found that you have a different reaction to a movie based upon whether you're watching it when you're right nostril dominant or when you're left nostril dominant. And you could see the same movie at two different times, and you'd have a more depressed reaction to the movie with one type of nostril dominance than if you were watching it in another. So very fascinating stuff, but it's to point out ultradian rhythms. So why all that long diatribe about nostril dominance? It's because it's a 24-hour cycle. It's less than a 24-hour cycle, and it's very important for students to do this quick review within 24 hours because of the circadian rhythms and the ultradian rhythms in their body and the brainwave back and forth on the dominance for your hemispheric dominance. So if they do that one simple thing and it only takes 3 to 5 minutes and it's done within 24 hours, what they remember, instead of being at 20%, pops up to 50 and it sticks at 50. If they don't do that, and they don't do anything else, it just gets worse and worse and worse. So if you share this kind of information with students, it may prompt some of them to do a quick review. And then you can share with them how, what are the different kinds of ways you can review with notes, with the textbook and so forth, or with your PowerPoint. Now, this is kind of a cool graphic about the forgetting curve, because if you look at the different colors, they become additive, so that you can see if someone does that review immediately after class, you get a jump up, and you'll be a little bit better after a month compared to no review. But if you do the immediately after class plus the 24 hours later, then you can see where the yellow line is, and it's even higher. And so you can see the additive effect over time of going back to review. So the simple re-exposure to information can be very effective, but there's a problem. What's a major problem with spaced repetition? This. Are the students actually going to do it? And in the absence of some kind of motivation or external trigger, they may not. So here are some quick suggestions. If you're teaching an online class, you can set up a 24-hour trigger requiring students to send back like a 3-4 bullet point summary, let's say, of the major topics covered in the class. That forces them to re-engage with the material, and it doesn't take that long. They send it to you. You can give them a point for participation. They become more actively engaged in the assignment. If you're teaching face-to-face, you can do exactly the same thing. Within 24 hours, drop it in, in my office box. Or even if you're teaching face-to-face, have them send it to you online. And you can see when it comes in. Anybody gets it in before the 24 hours, there you go. They got the point. So you can do it online. You can do it face-to-face. So the solutions then, I just talked about a couple, and now don't turn it over. Okay, now try to remember something from that stuff that you looked at a minute ago. Okay, the brain picture that those of you turned things around, okay, turned the paper over. So try to remember for 15 seconds. And now, turn it over, check if you remembered correctly, take a look at the stuff you didn't think to remember, and take 10 seconds to do a quick review. Anyone who may be online, I apologize. I couldn't leave the thing up while we're doing the activity here. Okay, turn it back over, and let's proceed. Retrieval practice. Now here's where you supercharge spaced retrieval, or remembering, like we talked about with the forgetting curve. This is really powerful. The neuroscience of the last, say, 5, 6, 7 years is showing that the initial intake of information is not when learning actually gets grooved in. When the learning gets grooved in is when you try to retrieve the information that you took in the first time. So if you're a student and you're in a lecture class, you're being bombarded by information, right? It's information that's quote unquote being put in. And so a lot of people think, well, if I'm a good student, I'm good at taking that in and it'll stick well. And that's what makes me a good student, because then I can remember it. Well, the research shows it's coming in, there is that initial exposure, but the actual learning of the material doesn't happen until you try to pull it out. Number one, you're going to find out whether it made it into long-term memory or not. But number two, what grooves those neural pathways, and it's really exciting in neuroscience now with the kinds of technology that we have. Researchers are actually starting to be able to trace the patterns that get used over and over again. They call them neural pathways when a particular piece of information is called up to mind. So it's not until you try to remember the stuff that you were exposed to that you're actually doing the learning. And so that's why the retrieval practice supercharges the spaced repetition. Because think about it, if the student is just going to re-expose herself for 3 to 5 minutes to stuff that she learned earlier, she's not really pulling it out because she's looking at what's already there, right? Now, she did get some gains just by looking, and that's what the graph showed. But to supercharge, to take it to the next level, if she looks, turns it over, and tries to say it in her own words, that's retrieving. And if you do that for yourself as a student, it really, really makes the learning stick easier, faster, and it's easier for you to pull it out when you need it. So this is the more effective way to think about learning. The learning's happening when you're pulling it out. It's not necessarily happening when you're putting it in. So to help your students understand, when you pull it out is when you learn, and if you want to groove that in, that knowledge, then you need to repeat that. Repeat the pulling out process. Easy way to do it, quiz yourself after you read a chapter in the textbook. Quiz yourself after you review the notes. Literally, it's actually putting in your own words and trying to remember that information. That's where the learning happens. So if you're a student, you want to prepare for a test, knowing the forgetting curve, you're going to hit something within every 24 hours for a quick review, but you're going to pull it out as the way to test yourself. And if the students don't do it on their own, then we faculty have an opportunity to do it with brief quizzes right at the start of class. And students will hate to hear this, and you guys back me up on this, because this is the way I thought when I was a student. You go into one of those classes, and it's the first day, and the instructor's talking about his syllabus and all of that, and somebody in the back row raises their hand and says, are the tests going to be cumulative in here? And if the instructor says no, oh boy, right? I'm going to feel great. And that means I can study for this one test, and then I can pretty much forget that. And then I can only focus and study on what's on the next test, right? But if you get that instructor who says, oh yeah, all tests in here are cumulative. Anything we've studied up to that point is fair game to be on a test. And then the students just, oh man, that's awful, right? But that is the absolute best way to learn this stuff. Easy, quickly, fast. And then the flipped classroom is another good way to do it. There are lots of ways to do a quick quiz, a quick review right at the beginning. So here is some proof statistically. This is from a study, I believe 2011, Karpicki and her co-authors. And you can see how much more effective retrieval practice was than our first one, which was the repetition, repeated review. That by itself was nowhere near as effective as retrieval practice, which by its very nature has to include the repeated study. And they even tossed concept mapping into the mix, and concept mapping has a fairly, robust reputation as a good study tool. So retrieval practice can be very, very effective for helping students learn. So what does this look like in class? Here's a good thing that works with many faculty that we've worked with at our center. The first thing, let's say you've set aside 5 minutes at the start of class to do this quick review. Well, first it's the student doing it by herself or himself. And so you've got 5 questions, let's say. Write down the answers to these 5 questions. So they take 2.5 minutes for that. Now let's get into small groups and figure out what is the right answer. And if people have different answers, they have to negotiate it. because the grade that's going to be assigned to this is the group grade. So the group has to decide, here's the answer to number 1, here's the answer to number 2, and the process then means that there's that social negotiation among learners, and if there are people with differing opinions, then the students have to take a deeper dive into the material, which is what you want them to do. It helps them learn more deeply. And so if you just make this a common practice for every class, it doesn't take long. I talked with an instructor just 3 weeks ago or so at UCO. Her class loves it. It took them a while to get into the rhythm, but the reason they liked it is because in the groups, they were able to nip in the bud those misconceptions. One group member would say, oh, no, that can't be right because I thought so-and-so. The other one says, no, that's not the way it is because of X, Y, Z. So it can work very well. It just takes a little setup, a little management, and it's retrieval practice. Retrieval practice that helps the students learn. Okay, once again, try to remember. Okay, take 15 seconds to try to remember from your sheet.